Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of A Zoom with a View. We'll be joined today by two very, very special guests from the team at Help Musicians and at Music Venues Trust to pick up from last week's conversation about what COVID had done to our new music industry. But for this week, we're going to start off with covering the main bits of news. My name's Cliff Fluey. I'm a partner at the law firm Lewis Silkin, and I run a digital advisory firm called 11.
And hello everyone again. I'm Sammy. I am CEO and founder of DV8 Digital.
Hello, I am Stuart, editor at Music Ally, and I think that intro was so much better than the guy who did it last week. That was it's quite a brutal competition now, isn't it? Who's the smoothest introduced?
I'll up my game next week, boys. I'll be ready.
Excellent. Well, we start this week with the news. The mic dropped from our friends at DCMS, who has asked the entire industry and all stakeholders interested in streaming to tell our government what the future of music streaming should look like. That's right, the government has decided to open Pandora's black box and talk about where and how money in streaming is made. So guys, what do we think?
Wow. I think, sorry, I'll follow up with that, but genuinely slightly flawed by this announcement. I mean, both of you know, I've been across a little bit of this throughout, and it's a part of a much bigger discussion, but very much brought to the forefront by the Broken Record and Fixed Streaming campaign, with Help Musicians, Tom Gray leading the charge, the Ivors, and quite a few other people as well. But yeah, bloody hell! I mean, it's a serious business, isn't it? The government are actually going to look across this, which I think a lot of people will say is needed. And I know from battles that I've had on social media for the last 10 years that some people will say it's bullshit. And I think that depending what side of the fence you fall on, the very simple fact that they're looking at this is incredible, really incredible. And who knows what's going to be submitted. I know a lot of boards today will be submitting evidence, and they are truly covering the whole industry. So I'm astonished, and I'm also glad. I think it's a good thing for them to be looking at.
Stu, it's literally your job to keep an eye on the news. Did you see this coming?
Well, I think Tom Gray's been pretty open. Everything he's been saying is like he wants politicians to get involved, and I think it's not a thing you call for lightly, is it? Because governments can get involved in things and do terrible damage. I think, but he's always been like, I think the government needs to look at this, and I think he's been pushing in this direction, because here in the UK, a parliamentary committee inquiry is the way you go down. Like happened with secondary ticketing, didn't it, a couple of years ago or a year ago? It's weird. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting, especially if everyone submits evidence and there's hearings, and it's going to maybe expose some interesting things. We get to talk about some stuff in public that maybe is often private. I suppose my kind of worry is there's no guarantee it's going to be run well and cover the things we think. Like I was reading
that idea, Stuart. What on earth makes you not have faith in our beloved government to not fuck something?
It's true. I don't know. I think maybe I'm just a pessimist,
Could be that.
A bemoaning pessimist. But like I saw the announcement, and the chair of this committee was he seemed to be very much focusing on the streaming services. And he said something like, algorithms might benefit platforms in maximizing income, but they're a blunt tool to operate. And I thought, literally no one's complaining about the algorithms in this case, are they? They're complaining about the contracts and the payouts and the splits. It's not about Discover Weekly putting Drake in instead of you.
Yeah.
So I worry that there's this kind of, we're in this period when everyone's ragging on tech firms, going, the algorithms of Facebook, aren't they evil? And actually in this situation, it's not the algorithms, it's the people and the contracts and the kind of, so I don't know. I worry that they're going to go down one route, and he didn't mention labels, but I know Tom has been pushing for, actually this is about label contracts and about artist relations. It's not just about Spotify and Apple Music. So I don't know.
It lifts the lid. I mean, we mentioned it in the last episode, with the leaky pipes, and there's a whole host of things. But what I do think this does is lift the bonnet a bit. And just when you were saying, the whoever's leading it and the comment they made, I once watched, I think it was Twitter and Facebook in a parliamentary thing, and the guy that was leading is like, I put something on the Twitter, and I just thought, Right, mate. Okay, and I think there will be a lot of that, and I think it's probably quite vital that the industry really help guide this, and it's absolutely vital that they do hear from all parts of the industry, because as we well know, gentlemen, everyone's got an opinion on this. But the fact that they're even looking at it, who knows what will come out? Even if it's again, to your point, Stuart, shining a light on some of the issues. I think this will rage for years still to come. But I don't know, Cliff, what do you reckon?
Well, I was going to say, probably people would say now isn't the time for idle speculation, but that's literally what this podcast is about. Apart from a 3-word slogan, what do we think? What do we think are the things that are in the crosshairs? If we decode what they're looking at, come on, let's speculate wildly. And
so I've got the questions here.
What is the universal? What is the artist going to? What's up for grabs? Do we reckon?
Well, I've got the questions here.
Yes,
so the questions they're asking. So one is, what are the dominant business models of platforms that offer music streaming as a service? So kind of investigate how they work. Have new features associated with streaming platforms, such as algorithmic curation of music or company playlists, influence consumer habits, tastes, etc.? What has been the economic impact and long-term implications of streaming on the industry, including for artists, record labels, record shops, etc.? Then, how can the government protect the industry from knock-on effects like increased piracy of music? Does the UK need an equivalent of the Copyright Directive, which isn't about piracy? It's about user-generated content and liability, and it's not the same issue. It's weird because that's the other thing. Like, you could have a whole parliamentary inquiry about what are we going to do instead of a European Copyright Directive once we Brexit. Like, that feels like a real. But then I was asking Tom about this earlier, and he was saying, no, a lot of the Copyright Directive, it's not just the stuff about liability, it's the stuff around artists, and there's like a whole clauses that aren't the ones that we argue about, that are about transparency and artists.
Transparency and portability, and actually creating a free digital market. So I suppose the things that I think, be very, very interesting is, are they going to focus on the right things? And if one were being terribly cynical, there are certain vested interests that will try and distract people, So, when the industry last went on the mountain and decided to look at copyright as a, sort of super nuts, decided that the parody right was the most important thing, and extending the term of recorded music. So, there's going to be very, very interesting are we going to keep people on the focus? I think user-centric. You, Sammy, were with Tom on that BBC Six Music special with Katie Tunstall and others, and Paul Pacifico, looking at, very much user-centric payments. That seemed to be sort of out there. I think that one's going to be a very interesting one that's up for grabs.
I worry about that a little bit. Like, I think we're probably all of a thing, like, we won't know what that will be until we try it. Someone's got to try it and we'll find out. But I don't think it's the answer. Like, if the MPs go, why aren't you doing this? This would solve everything. I don't think it would. Like, that's the worry. Again, if you go down the route of like this, oh, you haven't done that would solve it all. Why aren't you doing that? And it's like, well, actually, that we don't know how it would change things. We want to try it,
but that might push this forward. I mean, I know we've discussed this in a million other places, but there are loads of tests on user-centric, loads of them across Merlin, across the major labels. They have all got data. What hasn't been seen actually is the artist side of that, what it looks like for an artist or a songwriter. And I hope, I think anyone within the broken record or fixed streaming camp would hold their hand up if they're presented with data that said this doesn't work, that they would go, oh, fuck it then, let's not do that, because it doesn't work. But the transparency plays a huge part in that, because they haven't been able to see the data. But the labels also, and this is the war that rages on my Twitter whenever I post about fixed streaming or broken record, is some really big and great independent distributors saying, actually, we're fine, we're paying out all of our money directly from streaming to. So it does boil down to some degree to those deals also. There's so many. I mean, I've sat on boards that have tried to split this out, and let me tell you, they're like 6-hour meetings where we have to try and split out each subject. So who knows if the government are going to get into that? But I think we know for sure every part of the industry is going to have an opinion on this, and I, for one, quite look forward to hearing them.
Yeah. Well, there's two things I hope for as well. Like, I want to hear from artists here. Like, I think that's the important thing. And I want to hear from two kinds of artists. I want to hear from artists who are suffering. I think they need to tell their stories of, like, good artists who are suffering, not like people who aren't terrible and don't deserve to get heard. Like good artists making great music who are struggling. I think we need to hear them explain that and talk about it why.
Yeah.
But I'd love it to hear from artists who are doing well in this environment. And I want them to explain why they're doing well. Like what deals are they on? What companies are they working with? Like the ones who do, because I think I want there to be some positive case studies and listening. This is how it can improve. Because that again will shine a light on, well, actually there are some labels out there offering deals that are really.
Well, this goes back to your internet breaking interview with Daniel Ek, right? Where wasn't Daniel saying that essentially that people who do well have no incentive to speak out? So perhaps a really good aspect of this would be an opportunity for someone to understand this is how it works for me, this is why it works for me, and giving that other side of the argument. Because we do tend to we do tend to over-index on the picture of the artist staring sadly at their statement. Now, that's never a statement from the streaming service, of course, which, of course, is a really important element of the argument that doesn't come out. And I think my biggest worry is that, you've both, I'm sure, met MPs, and MPs tend to have a kind of, well, if we could do one thing for the industry, what would it be?
Yeah, what would it be?
That tends to, I hear that so many times. But my worry would be that the outcome of this is just one thing. And then that one thing actually might have unintended consequences. So be that user-centric or not allowing personalization of algorithms or, understanding, this whole all record companies are bad or all streaming companies are bad type as well. So it's going to take some severe steering, this thing. So it'll be fascinating to see where it ends up.
And I saw Tom Gray actually today on Twitter. Like he's not just like, we need to have an inquiry. He's like, right, everyone, get your statements in. Like that's going to be, I think, the part of the value of what he's doing. It's not just like securing this inquiry is amazing, and he deserves to put his feet up for a few days and but he's already rounding up people saying, look, tell your stories, put your stuff down, have your voice. This is your chance.
That's what we need. Yeah, that is what is needed.
Well, one thing I can say, and I can announce exclusively, is that next week's guest is going to be none other than Mr. Broken Record himself. Mr. Tom Gray has confirmed that he'll be joining us for next week. So I think we can put a lot of these questions to the man.
Isn't it lucky I was saying nice things about him just now? Imagine how awkward that moment would have been if I'd been saying, he's rubbish. Why is he banging on about this stuff for? That would be good.
We like to surprise you with guests, Stuart.
Yeah, never liked Gomez.
It's like Jukebox Drew when they'd have the person backstage.
Yeah.
So we should, talking of Spotify, should I do the kind of needle rip seg?
Yeah, go for it.
But so Spotify had a new thing yesterday, which was actually kind of a positive, possibly, development for artists.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. So Apple often in their keynotes will get a little only Apple can do this. But actually I was thinking about this, and pretty much only Spotify can do this. The way that they've actually merged their podcast offering and their music offering so significantly in one user experience as well. What they're looking to put together, it's really, really interesting. And it's had a lot of people taking them off beam. They hadn't expected it. Some people scratching their heads and trying to find what's wrong with it. But I think it's great. If you've got the opportunity to monetize these things as a royalty-bearing stream, and you've got an opportunity for people to be able to go beyond the playlist and make it much more personalized as well, I think it's fantastic.
We should probably explain it, shouldn't we?
Someone who's worked in radio for years, it's great.
We should probably explain it, shouldn't we? Because in case some people don't see, but
you wrote about it today, so please go right ahead.
Yeah. So it's what you said basically. It's like bringing podcast and music together. So now, if you're recording a podcast using Spotify's Anchor app, you can include music in it, and it's a full track. Well, it's people listening. If they're a Spotify subscriber, they hear the full track. If they're not, they hear a 30-second clip. And all those streams, presumably not the clips, actually, presumably the full tracks generate a royalty. I'm guessing the free listeners don't.
I didn't see anything in anything about it. Cliff, do you know?
I'll carry on. And I did it last night. I went away and I was like, I want to try this. So I got Anchor and I recorded a podcast with music in it, and it was on Spotify within about 3 hours. And so I wrote this thing yesterday, which when you go wildly off, you go, what does this mean? I'm going to speculate wildly. And I was like, wow, this could be like Spotify's equivalent of Instagrammers on Instagram, YouTubers on YouTube, TikTokers on TikTok. Like it could suddenly build this community of native, you could call them spotty casters or something, like people build an audience.
It's catchy and I like it.
Podcast.
But you know, I'm sort of. But they could promote the shit out of them on Spotify, so you hear their podcasts, and then.
But let's hope that they do, because I think one of the things, and we said this in the last episode, I think one of the things that's missing at the moment is a bit of curation. And if you take away algorithms for a while, which again we'll hear about for the next few months, the printed magazines are dead on their feet. They're all closing. They don't have the readership, and I really value when someone takes a track and can explain it to me in a artful, beautiful way that makes me want to hear it. And there's people that do it across radio as a DJ, and people that do it across print press. And I actually think there's a real opportunity for some of the media, for some of the existing media titles across music and across culture widely, to be able to get in on this and offer it as part of what they do, and to be able to shine a light on tracks. And the monetization part is absolutely brilliant, but there's something in that as a function. I mean, it's always done my head in that we couldn't. When I used to work at a record label, we uploaded talking playlists, which we were told by Spotify, originally they loved it, and then they said to stop doing it because when people hit the shuffle button, it fucks it. So, which is fine.
I think that was an audiobook once. I played it on shuffle by accident, and it was the most baffling thing. It was the Bill Bryson science one, and it was the most baffling thing I've ever done. I listened to it, I was like, I don't understand science, and it wasn't. I said it on the shuffle on my iPod.
We did with Prodigy and Billy Bragg. We did them, and they made total sense. But I think this will, for artists as well, and I think some artists will want to utilize that facility. I think we'll see a lot of them coming out as a talking track by track. And in this day and age, if we're going to be in lockdown again for however long, maybe how many artists could revisit their old albums? And I mean, if I was Spotify, I'd be looking at that. The catalog releases going, I've never had a chance to do this before, but now it's really easy. Here's a track by track. I think there's all kinds of possibilities there.
I did an interview.
Well, look, I mean, you've probably seen on Song Exploder hit Netflix, and it's doing great.
Oh,
great
it's lovely. It's lovely.
Genuinely lovely. And the opportunity for people to be able to do a kind of their own desert island discs, or the story behind, etc. It's fantastic for storytelling. I mean, I think from a radio perspective, the radio groups, this is quite a bold move. This is going to be very, very interesting for some of the other podcast providers as well that have struggled with how to deal with music rights, because the real issue has been how do you make sure it's been properly monetized as far as the rights holders are concerned. And then from, I think that there's a tremendous opportunity there as well, that, if Spotify are able to merge speech, advertising and music, then that's reinventing radio. And I've long said, challenged people saying, well, Spotify's the new radio, saying, well, radio's not just a bunch of tracks. Playlists are really, really important. That's the new album. But in order to have radio, to have that personal connection, there needs to be the speech, there needs to be the personal connection, there needs to be that relevancy and that sort of potency of what constitutes radio. And this is a massive step towards that.
I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, if I was Daniel Ek, or if I was, no, it wouldn't be him, it'd be, what's the name? The chief content, Dawn, I'm crap with names. And Courtney, as a man called Courtney and a woman called Dawn. I just think Dawn Ostroff, the chief content officer. If I was them, what I would be doing right now is sending my teams out to every Instagrammer with more than a million followers. Start with them, TikTokers too, and say, hey, come and use Anchor. Do your own music show every week. Get them on there, promote those shows on the platform, put them in, get them in front of people. When they get audiences, then start packaging it up for advertisers. It's a thing called Google Prefer, where YouTube say, right, here are 100 good channels. We'll package them up to make loads of money. And then suddenly, while everyone's been going, I wonder who they'll poach next. They pay Joe Rogan loads of money. Quietly, they've built a network of the next 100 Joe Rogans.
Their own.
And then it becomes this powerful thing. And then they have all the 17-year-olds listen to Spotify, not radio. I think I'm maybe thinking forward too much here. I'm not even sure that's their strategy, but
I like it, Steve. I like it. I think you're probably not far off.
It just feels like that sort of big, bold move that comes out, and we don't realize this even until 5 years later, when radio is a bunch of Instagrammers on Spotify, which doesn't sound such an appealing prospect when you put it that way. But let's see what they do with it. But let's see if my show becomes big enough for them to pay me $200 million to be a podcast. You know, that's the other opportunity here, I think.
You're worth more than Joe Rogan to me.
I won't have any white nationalists on ever. I promise. That's my.
Actually, no, you haven't already got.
Right, with that, gentlemen, we should probably go to our guests.
And welcome back. And now we're at the point of Zoom with a View, where we're going to have even more views in our Zoom. And as a follow-on from last week's conversation about what COVID-19 has meant for the music industry, during that time we talked about the hardest hit and actually the people who've done the most about it. We talked about Venues Trust and we talked about Help Musicians. And I am beyond delighted to say that we have all of the major people from Help Musicians and Music Venues Trust to join us for this part of the podcast. So we have Mark, Davyd and Bev Whitrick from Music Venues Trust, and we have James Ainscough, CEO of Help Musicians. And what we'd like to do is for Bev and Mark first to tell us more about what you do at Music Venues Trust, and then the same for James with regard to Help Musicians, for those of people who don't know what you guys have been up to. And I'll be over to Sammy to steer us through the next part of our Zooming and our viewing.
Well, has to be said, Music Venue Trust is but a baby charity compared to Help Musicians, which has been around for a really, really long time. We were founded in 2014. We are a UK registered charity, and our mission is to protect, secure and improve the grassroots music venues of the UK. So we do work across the whole UK. And in that 6 years, we've gone from a concept that Mark had to a kind of small but mighty charity that now has a level of recognition that I don't think we could ever have imagined that could be achieved so quickly, but also has a membership. We have a Music Venues Alliance of the venues we work most closely with and represent, and that has currently 930 members, which has taken us a bit by surprise because we were once asked how many grassroots music venues in the UK, and I think we said 500 to 600. And, you know, particularly this year, we had 600 at the beginning of this year, and then obviously with 2020's particular wonderful characteristics, the need and the demand has really bloomed. And
I think we've got them all now, though.
Yeah, I think we've got pretty much every grassroots music venue across the UK, and then a few that you wouldn't necessarily look at and go, okay, that's a grassroots music venue. You might think that's an art centre or it's a pub with music, but it performs the role of a grassroots music venue in the community in which you find it. So particularly in rural areas, it's unlikely to have a dedicated grassroots music venue, but an art centre or a pub might perform the same role.
Mine was my local cricket club in a tiny town in North Yorkshire.
Yeah.
We put shows on there, and it was the only place that we could see gigs without travelling an hour.
They're quite often in strange places, especially once you get into rural communities. But I mean, even in town, I mean, there's one on a boat. There's one that some fool opened in an old public toilet. That was me. You know, they're generally run by what might be lovingly described as mavericks, when we're not describing them as crazy people.
And we're going to talk a little bit about everything that you've been doing for your members shortly. But welcome to a Zoom with a View, both of you. Very nice of you to join. And now, James, can you tell us a bit about Help Musicians, please?
Yeah, sure. So Bev's right, Help Musicians is a relatively old charity, 99 years at the moment, looking forward to our centenary next year. Founded by Edward Elgar and Vaughan Williams. Actually, when a very well-known singer of the time died tragically at the height of his career, and he was known for caring for other musicians, both as they became ill, but also actually to help younger musicians develop careers. So we were founded in this guy's honour in order to kind of continue his private work as a charity. Yeah, 99 years old, but actually, just to say to Mark and Bev, you know, we're an old charity, but we're learning from you guys and what you've been doing and the energy you've been putting in. So you're never too old to learn, and it is phenomenal to see what Music Venue Trust have done. Our work is slightly different. Yeah, we care for musicians, and we try and support them across the three areas that need to be working well for a musician's career to succeed. So we give creative development support, we give support on health and well-being issues, and we give support on business skills. Because the issue we find with musicians is that as their career goes on, if any one of those sides of the triangle is weak, then the whole career falters. So we've been trying to do that, and over time, obviously we started off in the classical world, but over time we've become a charity that looks out for all professional musicians, whatever genre they work in, and whatever their age. As soon as they turn pro, that we're there for them. And then of course, again, like with MVT, we've been doing good work before 2020, but 2020 presented different challenges and some very big issues to deal with.
And we mentioned this. I don't know if both of you heard our first episode, but we mentioned both of you within that, because especially I personally know people that your charities have helped them, have helped musicians. I know several musicians that have been given a lifeline, and venues. My feed is full of venues, Mark and Bev, who without your help and campaigning may not have survived the rest of this year. And I think just as a jumping off point, and Mark and Bev will go to you first, could you just tell us a little bit about what's just happened in terms of the achievement of getting money out for the venues? Would you mind just telling us a little bit about what that looks like first?
Yeah, I think it's really positive history of the crisis is we identified very early on exactly how bad this was. I mean, without boasting, we were ahead of the government in terms of our sector. We worked out we delivered our first report to the government on the 9th of March. And that's, 2 weeks before they even realised how bad it was going to be. And the reason we were able to do that is because of the work we'd done for the 5 years before that. We finally understood the sector in a way that nobody had before. We understood the kind of people that were in it. We understood their economic models a little bit better. So we knew how big the problem was. We were able to write that down very, very clearly. We provided, I think, 11 or 13 reports to different layers of government very, very quickly. And those reports all outlined that this would require a major government intervention. That, yes, the public, around the world, we've done with our Save Our Venues campaign, with £3 million in donations from the public to keep venues growing. Incredible. But the scale of this problem is just too much for that. It's always going to be too much. It's probably too big in the small venues for even a Live Aid style event, that it's something major. You're talking in the range of £60 million is going to be lost every 6 months by these venues. And when I say lost, I don't mean, they're not going to make that money. I mean, that's rent, that is salaries for the most basic staff, it's their services. So around about 120 million a year. So we campaigned very early on that we would need this major government intervention. They eventually brought that forward. The one you're talking about is called the Cultural Recovery Fund. That was announced early July. Time starts to blur, doesn't it? But it was announced early July. It's a £1.57 billion package, but you have to break that down. And by breaking it down, you eventually arrive at the thing that there's £500 million is available for people to bid into. And so what we did was to get the whole sector, which has never really been publicly funded. When we started this work, less than 2% of our sector had ever received any public funding. And we put all the tools in place. We worked with them so they would really understand it. We brought in a review team to review their applications. We had writers come in to help them. We held, I don't know how many seminars.
Lots of webinars.
Webinars saying, no, you write this question like that. We brought everybody in. Everybody put their applications in the middle of August. We had to go back to other fundraising to try and get them to this point. On Monday, the first round of these were announced. We had around about 250 to 260 venues applied in the first round, and we had a 90.2% success rate.
Wow.
Because we were worrying last week, I think, weren't we, that we were sort of looking at thinking, oh God, what if the kind of the areas of culture that are used to applying for public money and are good at this get it all, and the venues we love don't. And that's why. So now I kind of understand. I was half expecting bad news, and when I saw that figure the other day, and now all the behind the scenes work clearly played its part there.
Yeah, but we were completely taken by surprise by the level of success. I mean, Mark and I have both worked in cultural funding for decades, and there's such an established narrative that you can make alterations around the edges, but you know, the main bit of cultural funding will always go to, you know, you reel them off, opera and classical music and ballet and theatre. And
Fatma apparently is retraining in cyber.
But it's absolutely established that those are expensive art forms for some reason, as if a Muse concert doesn't cost an absolute fortune. You know, that there is a narrative that those art forms are expensive. And I used to work in much more in that. I was an arts development officer, so you know, I had these conversations for many years where I was doing my arts development job in the day and then partying with pop stars in the evening, which was a little bit of a kind of
sounds really fun, Bev, to be honest.
That was my late 90s. It was great. But, you know, it really completely bemused me that I could see as good art being created in the informal, shall we say, art sector.
The maverick sector.
As well, yeah. You know, what was seen as the more commercial sector. And then, but it wasn't recognised. And actually what's happened this year is a whole sea change. And it has to be said, there have been some really key people in that. And one of the people for music is actually the head of music at Arts Council England, Claire Mira-Nelson. Who's been awesome.
And a guy at the DCMS called Ariel Summer has really, and actually the whole team there has really worked hard to do this. I think we should just, for the sake of anybody watching, we should put some numbers on it, just to explain how big that is.
Please do.
90% success rate. The overall level of success rate in that fund was 70%. So grassroots music venues were 20% above the curve. It is the most successful sector in that round by a long chalk. Contemporary music, well, let's do a comparison. In the 2018 division of the core funding that Arts Council gave away, less than 2% of the central fund went to contemporary music. By contemporary music, I mean everything that in this conversation people might think of as being pop, rock, you know, whatever. Okay, in this round, 18.6% of all the money went to contemporary music. So that's 19 times the result that we got in 2018 in just one fund. And of the applicants, believe it or not, 14% of successful applicants came from grassroots music venues. And we were up against theatres, museums, libraries, I mean, just the whole range of the cultural sector. So I'm really proud of having done it. I'm really proud of the venues for having done it and start with the process. But I think actually there's a huge moment here, frankly, where
it's got a strategic implication for the future for music.
Are we just changing this fund, or are we actually going, right, okay, contemporary music is now part of the cultural landscape in a way it never was before. And from this point on, maybe contemporary music needs to be recognised as the art form it's always been in these funding decisions and in the way that these organisations like Arts Council and DCMS recognise culture, frankly.
Well, let's hope so. Before you guys joined, and you'll see it when you watch it back. We were wondering about the DCMS and what they might do around different subjects, but it's very good to hear that they did embrace this, and we'll get into what that actually means in a second. James, I just wondered if we could just talk, because similarly, help musicians genuinely have saved a lot of individuals. And Beverley's talking there about how important, you know, art is wherever you find it. Your organisation are managing to keep some people's heads above water right now, where arguably you shouldn't necessarily be the people doing that, but you really have helped a whole section of our industry. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, if it's okay?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, it's not what we thought we would be using our money for this year, but it's a great privilege to help. I mean, a bit like with MBT, I think being fast out of the blocks at the beginning was actually the most important thing we could have done, because it was quite clear that whatever the government might ultimately do to support individuals, it wasn't going to happen quickly. And so within a week of lockdown, we had our first hardship scheme up and running. And within about 4 weeks of lockdown, we'd managed to distribute about £8.3 million to 16,700 musicians, and that was massively important for them, because they were waiting for help. Even if you felt you would qualify for universal credit, you couldn't get through that process very quickly, because everybody in the country was applying for it. And so those initial kind of £500 payments that we made to musicians were enough to pay that first month of rent, pay the first food bills and whatever. Allowed musicians to see what the government was going to do to help. Allowed many musicians time to pivot for themselves and find more teaching or develop online work or whatever else. And so yeah, we were just lucky that we were able to move quickly. I mean, it was, I must admit, behind the scenes, it was, I wouldn't quite say chaotic, but it was manic. It was a bit like, you know that scene in Apollo 13 where they have to make a carbon dioxide filter out of whatever they can find laying around on the spaceship. And so we kind of emptied out the box of systems and tech that we had. And we're like, how the hell do we run a process with this? But thankfully, we had a few people from the music industry who kind of come from a ticketing background. And so we kind of had a box office mentality to process it. And you can do volume when you think like that. And then the second round of hardship funding that we did, which has been going on throughout the summer, was deliberately designed in response to the first round of government support, seeing that the self-employment income support scheme that they offered was very good for those who were eligible for it, but had great big holes in it, meaning a lot of musicians weren't eligible for it at all. And so we designed a hardship scheme to pick up those musicians and give them basically top-up payments on top of what they could get on universal credit, or on top of whatever bits of income they could earn. The idea being that if you can give someone enough to stop that downward spiral of losing where you live and getting a bad credit rating, not being able to pay, having to sell your instruments, all that kind of thing, actually a surprisingly small amount of money each month can stop somebody tipping over the edge. And if you can get that into as many musicians' pockets as possible, you can do a huge amount of good to keep them going, and then they've got the time to breathe, as it were.
You really have done a great amount of good, though, Joe. I mean, even just in saying that, I know at least 3 people that have a monthly payment from you, session musicians and touring musicians who lost their entire year, that they were reliant. They'd just come out of a quiet winter, about to go into a festival season, and completely decimated their income. So the fact that you'd even managed to, as an organisation, think about the idea of topping up what the government were already providing, I think it's a incredible feat that you guys have pulled off.
Well, thank you. And it's big team effort. I guess one of the things is having a team who've worked with musicians for so long. You have a very clear understanding of actually what you mean when you talk about musicians. Because I think a lot of people think about, when you say musician, they think either of Elton John or an Elton John wannabe. I'm sorry, I'm not picking on Elton John there. But the vast majority of musicians, they're not ever going to be featured artists. They're not trying to establish that kind of career. They're not freelance by choice for tax reasons. They're freelance because that's the only way you can work as a musician. They've had to put decades of practice into their art. So telling them to go and do their job is an emotional wrench for them, and they're already working in a way that has multiple income streams. They perform as much as they can, but they try and teach. They do recording sessions, but all of that is live, and all of that is precarious, and all of that goes on day one of lockdown. And that's why we had to move quickly. And to be quite frank, we didn't deserve to exist as a charity if we weren't able to move fast and help those musicians. So actually, it was about, there's a time when you have to prove yourself as an organisation, and we either rose to the challenge or we didn't. So we were determined.
I feel like you both have more than rose to the challenge, both of you on this call. I know for sure there's been sleepless nights, and I mean, I don't know, have either of you ever considered having a holiday? Do you know what that word means in this?
We did.
Yeah, we did.
We had 5 days in Porto, and it was brilliant.
Goodness.
I mean, we weren't the other 194 days since the 9th of March. We did have 5 days in Porto. So, you know.
No, but I do know how busy it's been. And even, again, it feels quite special to have both of you, as organisations on the call, because when we're looking at venues, and a lot of the venues that we were talking about, whether it's not traditional venues, are the very places that the people that James is talking about may go and play and perform or teach or do anything. And this is an entire ecosystem that was nearly lost. But we're not out of the woods, are we? And that's why I'm in awe of both of you and the everything that's been achieved. But we're not out of the woods yet, and there's certain sections of this ecosystem that we're not talking about there that probably haven't received help, and whether it's crew or whoever it might be. I know there's some trickle down, I believe, from some of the venue stuff from what I've been reading, but there are sections of that ecosystem that are not okay yet, and this is not a long-term solution, isn't it? I think we need to make that clear, don't we, that everything we're talking about here is not a long-term solution to, if we're out of the game for another 6 months or 12 months, what does that look like for both of your members?
Do you remember when it started? People were delaying gigs until October this year and saying, well, we'll postpone March gigs to October. It'll be done by then. And now I don't know how far ahead you're looking in terms of when the support needs to end. Like, how are you thinking about next year even?
Well, the support they've just announced, the government has just announced, and the stuff that's coming in Wales tomorrow, and there's a round 2 tomorrow as well from the English government, that gets everybody through to the 31st of March.
However, in Scotland, the only fund for venues up till now was funding till the end of October, and Northern Ireland have not come up with anything for venues at all.
They've got £29 million, but they haven't decided what to do with it yet, which is very Northern Ireland government.
Yes, they do tend to work quite slowly, but also there are some venues who weren't eligible for the funding and some venues who didn't get it. So even though absolutely a lot of the focus of the industry at large is sort of on, okay, who hasn't had a fund yet, even those who some funds have been available, it hasn't hit everyone. So we're actually increasingly talking to people who are wanting to do something that fundraises for Save Our Venues and musicians, or Save Our Venues and crew. And it is very much about acknowledging the ecosystem, as you say, Sammy. And in fact, it's conversations that we have with James and Claire at Help Musicians a lot about, why we talk together and why there's a synergy, because obviously all the bits have to be looked after for this machine to work. Yeah. But we've started talking about jigsaw pieces, and the funding that started to be announced this week is, it's quite a nice big bit of the jigsaw, but it's only a part of it, because it's my job to sit in all these meetings and go, well, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, because so much of the attention seems to always be on England, because of course so much of the music industry is based in London. Well,
and I saw today actually that James, you're actually you've been appointed to oversee part of the freelancers fund in Scotland, which is that right?
Yeah, that's literally just out a couple of hours ago. So Creative Scotland have set aside £5 million for freelancers across the arts.
Yeah.
And 1.1 million of that is for freelancers in music. They've asked us to be the kind of administrator of that fund.
They've become very collaborative recently, which is lovely, because we didn't have a really good relationship with them until this year, and actually the crisis has really helped foster a good relationship with them.
Yeah, and I think, again, just to kind of pay tribute to Claire Mira-Nelson at Arts Council England, I think she set the right tone and led the way. She's been instrumental to help musicians in accessing funding from Arts Council England, and I think either by action or by word, I'm sure what she's done has been a positive influence in Scotland as well.
She makes phone calls to Scotland because, of course, that's where she comes from. I know that much.
She has the right accent to persuade them to do something. That's how it works. But I without keep going back to James, though, I would, talking about how long this is going to last for and the kind of impacts, the one we haven't really touched on yet is something that isn't talked about very much when it comes to venues. It's been slightly more recognised elsewhere, and that is the huge mental health crisis that we're going through in the music industry, and the work that Help Musicians are doing specifically on that way before this crisis came along has been absolutely exceptional. We pointed it from our own website. please thing. But I think the level of stress and anxiety is not yet fully understood by government or really by anybody looking into this industry. We all look like we're having an absolutely marvelous time most of the time. But in fact, inside our industry, we all know how stressful it is, how anxious people are. And then you pour this on top of that. I mean, we have a nice big team of coordinators across the country now, but, they're taking extremely difficult, highly personalized calls on a regular basis. We take those as well. I mean, there's a proper, Stuart's question is like almost like when could we expect it to come back? But I honestly, the money is one issue, protecting the infrastructure and even protecting the individuals is another issue. But even with the money that James has got and the money that we've managed to get in, at the moment, my biggest concern is individuals. That's the honest truth. I mean, we've got a couple that are really not great cases. That it's difficult to know what to do for people. Throwing money at this situation won't help. This is their life.
Well, I think one of the things I've really realised is that this crisis is much harder for people whose life revolves around planning. I mean, because you can't make plans. Or you can make plans, but you can't have any confidence that you're going to be able to deliver the thing you've planned. And of course, the whole of what we all do is about diaries and plans and schedules and all of that. And I have spoken to people who do something different, whose lives have not actually changed that much. Whereas, of course, everybody in the creative industries, actually, not just music, but in the creative industries, absolutely works towards project deadlines and tours and delivery dates and travel schedules and all of this. And I think I feel it really, really, particularly because we have quite complicated family plans all the time, because we and our daughters live across 3 different countries. So, there's always some travel schedule to organise or something that needs doing. So I'm really hyper aware that is my life and that's how my brain works. But I think to some degree or other, having that ability to plan things taken away from you actually completely unbalances the way you think.
That's being polite. We're an industry of control freaks, and we've lost control. That's the truth, isn't it?
James, are you seeing that across help musicians? Are you seeing? I mean, I certainly have both personally, and I can see it in my social feeds that people are being really impacted by this in a way that money may not solve.
Yeah. And in fact, I've got some stats for you on it, because we ran a survey of musicians a couple of weeks ago. In fact, we're kind of putting these stats out tomorrow as a bit of a press release, because they're so bleak. Firstly, 96% of musicians that we surveyed said they'd lost the majority of their income. 55% of them are actually earning nothing from music whatsoever, which means that 4 in 5 are worried about paying household bills. Nearly half are worried about losing the roof over their head. And then only 19% expect any return to normality in the first half of 2021. And 76% are worried about the longer term viability of staying in the music industry. And it's this complete unknown for them. If you put someone in a precarious situation and say you only have to hang on for 1 month or 3 months or 6 months, they can do it. They can make a plan. They can somehow maintain that grip. But if you put someone in a situation and say you just have to hang on, and we don't know when we can rescue you, don't know when any return to normality will happen, it's almost impossible to retain the right state of mind. So I think, as you all know, one of the things we do is run Music Minds Matter, which is a mental health helpline, which is open 24/7, and anyone in the music industry can ring it. It's the main thing we do that's not just for musicians. Your first 3 months of lockdown, we saw a 25% increase in calls to that helpline. And what we're very conscious of now is that, you're right, musicians don't just need financial help. Financial help is the start of alleviating some worries, but they need a lot more. So over the summer, all our hardship beneficiaries were also offered elements of mental health and mental well-being support, including offering them all the Thrive app, which is actually quite a good way of kind of working out how to maintain your mental well-being. And I think what we're also conscious of as we go through the winter is that musicians also need to be given help in preparing for the return to work, however far ahead it is, however unknown, uncertain it is. Actually, if they don't find ways to make music or to build skill sets that they don't have that could be really useful, whether it's about how to build a fan base on Instagram, or how to read a royalties contract and understand neighbouring rights. If they can use their time productively, then at least they can feel like they're preparing themselves for when the uncertain world finishes. So I think for us, it's always going to be hardship plus mental health support, hardship plus career help, hardship plus creative development work, for those who actually are in the right state of mind to do it. But it really is bleak out now, and I think we forget as well that when you're a professional musician, it's not just a job. It's a calling. It's something that it's not the only thing you can do, but it's the only thing you're compelled to do. And so to remove the ability to make music away from people, to remove the ability to connect with audiences, it's more than just financial worry. It's a whole change of lifestyle that you grieve for. You really go through that grieving process, and I think that's what a lot of musicians are doing at the moment, and they really need support that goes way beyond financial.
I've got a couple of questions for our team. So Mark and Bev, of course, from Music Venues Trust. Some people on the call may know that for many years, James ran the Royal Albert Hall, the most successful venue on the planet, as it were. So question number one was a lot of things. So Music Ally did doing these sort of industry touch bases, and there just seemed to be this thing in the industry saying, we didn't realise quite how important live was. They said it in different language, as it were. Are you surprised that they're surprised? Is question number one. And question number two, it's been such a torrid time for your constituents. Have there been any good things that you've seen, or things that you think are going to carry into the future? Or perhaps it's too early for that. But anyway, those are my questions. And I don't know, maybe over to Music Venues Trust to start first.
Can we do two first?
You do two, and then I'll come wading in with controversial opinions on number one.
Okay.
Can't wait.
Number two, what's good? People. Mark actually has you have a T-shirt with it on, don't you? One of the two things that we say a lot is, without people, you're nothing.
Which is an old Joe Strummer quote.
Which is a Joe Strummer quote, and we just think is so very apt for these times, because the music community is utterly awesome, and the solidarity shown and the generosity of musicians, other music industry organisations, fans, has been incredible. I mean, as Mark said, we launched Save Our Venues at the end of April, and it provided an ability to donate to either an individual venue or to a central fund. And between the big donations we've had, some of which have come from music industry organisations or individual artists, and then lots and lots of fundraising activity, we're nearly at 3 million. And it's just amazing, and people are very willing to show their love and be supportive, and that has been really incredible to be part of that community.
And to extend that community point, the venues themselves, we have a lot of venues this week who now know they're safe until the 31st of March. Their immediate reaction was, what can I do for the others?
Yeah.
That was it. My inbox was flooded with venues just going, what can I do? There's a venue down the road from me, didn't get their money. What are we doing to help them? So that's the community bit. It's been incredibly, quite life affirming, actually. Crisis brings out the best in people, I think. Point number one, though, Cliff.
Mark, before you get controversial, can I just echo your and Beth points about community as well? Because we've had huge amount of support from the very largest to the very smallest. BPI gave us well over £1 million for our fund. PPL, we've already talked about Arts Council England. Artists donated, and then you have people just doing a sponsored walk, and they raise 50 quid. But that that money goes straight to a musician and it makes a real impact. So there has been this great community sense across the entire music industry. And also, my other big positive is that in the nation as a whole, we've never valued music more than we did during lockdown. You know, actually what music did to kind of lift people's spirits, to console them in their darker times. When you even just seeing a little kid playing something on the street at 8 p.m. on a Thursday, see musicians, big names doing great things to draw the nation together. So I think we're going to come out of this whole thing with a nation reminded of the value of music, the power of music. And I think, you know, ultimately there will be a great benefit from that, because people will be desperate to go back to live music when it's able to happen on an industrial scale again. So those are the two positives for me: the community and also just value of music. But Mark, go for point one. I'm keen to hear what you have to say.
Now it's time for a heated debate.
Well, ultimately, I think this crisis, well, I mean, in our own sector, it's thrown a magnifying glass on a lot of problems we have, which we already knew about. And the crisis isn't new. It's just like the ownership of the buildings. 93% of our grassroots music venue are tenants.
Yeah.
You know, so, and in this crisis, when the government first started handing out grants on your retail, hospitality and leisure grants, 62% of the money was flowing straight through the venues into the hands of private landlords. What a crazy way to run a cultural infrastructure system. I mean, the government literally bailing out private landlords because they've got tenants who are providing community service, are providing a space. Mad. So that needs tackling. That wasn't what I was going to go for, this controversial.
Oh, it's a good start there, Mark. Carry on.
Yeah. Here's my question, and nobody's given me an answer to it yet, so maybe you three can try, or maybe James wants to join in. I bet he'll want to be quiet. Why are musicians and our crew in this unbelievably desperate, awful situation? 25% of the music industry is shut down. 80% of their income's vanished. Where's the other 75%? I'm not looking to have a row with anybody. I just want to know the answer. The truth is that we have a £5.2 billion industry, of which the live music bit is only £1.1 billion. So it's not even 25%. Every musician I speak to is absolutely bankrupt. All of their work that actually pays them day to day has gone missing. Okay, that's really tragic, and we need to get the live music scene back up. Where's the rest of the money? To me, that's a much bigger question posed by this crisis. Why are musicians so unbelievably reliant on performing live? Why isn't there a better mixed economy of where their money comes from? How do we arrive at the situation where the only people protected in this crisis are the 2 or 3% at the top of our recording artists who actually make a living out of recording? And 96, 97% of them are desperately trying to divide up the 25% that's in the live music industry. And when that closes down, we're all running around like headless chickens. I mean, you're bound to know Tom Gray's Broken Record campaign, you know, the way that Ivers are talking about that now. We need a major examination of where the money is going here. And I would say that we also need to include in that, where is the long-term investment that's coming out of recorded and streaming going back into live, if live is where musicians are making their money? You know, my members live off, honestly, they live off minus percentage of profit. Most, and 31% of our members are now not-for-profit entities because it's the only way they can keep going. We're a £5.2 billion industry. That makes no sense. All this crisis has done is to throw it into sharp relief. Where's the money?
I might set Sammy off now, actually, because
I was going to say, I know you know I'm raring to go, but I'll let you.
You've said this a lot in the past, though, about we've had this industry where live and recorded have been almost completely silent in a lot of ways, haven't they? Like labels don't deal with promoters. Like it's and like the Tom Gray thing, we were talking about him before you came on, and we were saying like, well, I guess I don't know if it's a silver lining.
He's on next week. He's on our next episode.
Yeah. Come back on. You can tell me the answer.
The one thing that's done, it has shone light on this, and that's why we now are going to have a parliamentary inquiry, I guess, because it's in the open. So, like you say, like we were saying, we hope that has teeth and it properly digs into the reasons why and doesn't get distracted down one particular. Because, like you say, it's a whole bunch of different issues here that have been papered over, I suppose.
But also in live specifically. I mean, so I in a former life was both a promoter and a tour manager and have all the wrinkles to prove it. But there was a there's certain things, whether we can look at recorded for sure, and then that is being looked at, and I know everyone on this call knows that I want it looking at, but also there's weird things within the live industry itself, whether that's the large monopolies or, you know, a certain sector. I mean, even like if we go back to musicians, since I used to be in a band when I was 13, awful guitar player, awful, but we used to get 50 quid to 200 quid for a support gig. It's the same now.
Oh yeah, 50 quid support band.
Yeah, and I've always had to grapple with it, because obviously I've moved into marketing and digital, but it's gone, hang on, where the fuck did we go wrong there? That actually, you know, we can get a 70 quid ticket with a booking fee that probably costs more than the support actor actually getting for a show. And there's certain things within the live industry that I think probably need looking at as well. And whether that is, you know, tenants and ownership and all the rest of it, or the large monopolies, or recorded, and that's a battle that's going to be played out. And I, for one,
there was a moment,
wait.
wasn't there, like the first wave of artists criticizing streaming that years ago, and there was this kind of quite sort of patronizing comebacks, like, you can sell tickets and merch, but in a way, it was kind of true. You could sell tickets, and like you were saying, like the money came from there, and that's what stopped everyone going after that issue more. And like you say, now when the tickets have gone, everyone's left here bankrupt.
But it's the cultural thing. So in episode 1, dear listeners, we were chatting about the potential for the digitization of some of the music industry, and I work in digital, and I'm a big advocate for that. But also, I come from a small town and grew up in the north of England, where actually venues for me, I could find a tribe. It wasn't actually about listening to, you know, whatever band. It was a scene. I found my people. And there's a real cultural and spiritual element to it, if I want to sound that wanky, but it really is. And there's something that's removed from that if we remove the physical experience. And I certainly, and we always again talk about London, and for me this is much bigger than London. This is almost more important to the rest of the UK and Scotland.
And it's not about big cities at all a lot of the
Absolutely.
time. And because we represent the small players, we do talk an awful lot about the importance of considering every community. I mean, we've kind of coined various phrases that we're very amused to see picked up around the place now. So grassroots music venues actually were not talked about at all a few years ago. And
yeah, but you've soon changed that, haven't you?
And I sit in pan-European meetings laughing now at everybody calling them grassroots music venues. But one of the things that I've also noticed is also being trotted out is we've been talking for a long time about the cultural, social and economic importance of venues. And I'm not for a moment suggesting we're the only ones that talk about that, but in terms of venue spaces, you have to look at all three of those elements, because every grassroots music venue, every arts centre, every theatre has a cultural, social and economic value in its community. And particularly away from big cities, the loss of one venue is an absolute tragedy. The loss of a venue in a city can alter the balance of things and, you know, can take the place that a particular group of people went, and is always really, really sad. But it's not the tragedy that it is if it's the venue for a whole small town and the surrounding villages and, you know, the place that everybody comes.
But that's the thing, isn't it? The digital, as much as, and again, as a digital advocate, because we can connect on a global level online, but actually there's still a serious thing about your local area and your local community that music has a huge part to play in, whether that is walking down your high street and seeing a busker, or going into a bar and there's a local open mic on, or whatever that situation looks like, where music makes our lives better in some way that might not necessarily be the case. But just quickly, I was going to ask James as well. And so James, where I know, and I'm privy probably more than I should be to some of the money that you guys have been granted, just because I'm across various boards. But how do you see this playing out at the moment? Where do we see this going? Like, and I'm going to ask you both this because I'm worried that we could talk for hours, and I wish we could talk for hours, and we'll probably get you back. But I'm really keen to understand where this goes next, because we know that this is with all the will in the world, this can't solve all the problems. So what are our options going forward? 2 questions actually for both of you. What could our industry itself be doing to help going forward? I think is an important question. But also, what does this look like if this situation doesn't change, and let's say that we're still stuck in COVID and everyone has the same restrictions for 6 or 12 months? What do we need to be doing, or what do our government need to be doing further to what's happened already?
Okay, well, I mean, I think from our perspective at Help Musicians, the most immediate concern is the reduction in the self-employment income support rate from the government. So, as you probably know, it was originally 80, then 70, and now it's going to become 20%.
Awful, which I think I might have tapped. In fact, I won't repeat what I called it on the last one, but I think I'd said it was living off F all is what I think I said. But how can it be expected to live on 20% of that?
Yeah, and it's 20% of what for most musicians is a very small number anyway, because as I said, most musicians are not Elton John or even Elton John wannabes, and we already knew there were gaps in the self-employment income support scheme where people weren't being covered, and now those who are covered are going to be, I think, probably receiving not enough to survive. So unless there's a change in that scheme, our view at Help Musicians is we're going to have to be doing a lot more hardship support work over the winter months than we had to do over the summer. So we're kind of ramping up to launch another round of funding for musicians to apply for, and we're going to be looking around for people who kindly want to put money into that pot. I think we spoke earlier that there's £1.1 million from Creative Scotland, and we had £1 million pledged by the Arts Council at the end of August. So we have some money to crack on with, but it's going to be multi-million pound. And I think the shame of it is there are a lot of other people in the economy who are going to be supported to a much higher level by the government. So I'm not a believer in the magic money tree, and I know there's a limit to what the government can do. And I am incredibly grateful for the 1.57 billion that has helped preserve a lot of the ecosystem, and for the good that SICE did do over the summer. But if you're employed and you can't work, you're going to end up with 70% plus of your income for those months you can't work. If you're self-employed, you get 20%, and that doesn't seem fair. So we need to do more hardship work, and we'd love people in the industry, musicians who can afford it, the industry themselves, music lovers, all to help us financially so that we can do that. And obviously we will put more of our reserves into that as well. I mean, long term, and I know, everybody, I'm sure would agree on this, long term, the only solution is to get live music going again.
Yeah.
And find ways to make that work. Part of it is just around clarity, certainty, guidance on how you open a venue. And part of it, I think, is accepting that for venues and for promoters, the risk-reward balance has been changed by social distancing.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be help to allow you to put on an event that can at least break even or take on the risk that it may or may not happen.
So that my partner has restaurants, and I think we might have mentioned it the last one, but the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, for sure. I mean, whether it did, spread the virus or not, the government stepped in to subsidise some of that. And I know that there are calls for it. I can't remember who is calling for it. We've discussed it on the last podcast. Remember,
is there
guys?
a thing like the government pays
one voice?
Yeah.
one voice are calling for like a seat out to help.
But even if, in terms of venues, because again, I know just from being a promoter, there's no way that you can be profitable or even actually probably cover your costs depending on what you're looking at. So I think that we said this in the last one as well, where it's not just a venue; it's what you take on the bar. There's a lot more to it than just turning up to see a band play. So maybe that to Mark and Bev as well. Like, I mean, absolutely, and I sincerely hope you celebrated when that news came in. But we put the celebrations aside for 1 second. What does that look like going forward? What are your concerns when that plays out? What are your concerns going forward?
I think that, I mean, they've got more money. There's 250 odd million pounds that's not been committed yet, that they're holding back to work out what needs to be done. We, like James, we'd like to see some of that going to self-employed musicians, self-employed crew, self-employed venue staff. There's enough of those as well. Yeah. I'm going to take a completely different tack, though. I think our own industry has become locked in this vortex of negativity and kind of downward spiral of, everything's wrong and there's nothing. And that's not who we are. And I think there are some great things happening. We make events with their campaign, lighting up venues in red and everything else. And then there's a One Voice campaign. There's the Let the Music Play. There's the Save Our Venues. I think we need one really big, positive, unifying event where we don't say we need money and we don't say we need this. We just need an event where we say, this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is how we do it. And actually we should use this crisis as an opportunity. That's the truth. It's not a very nice, comfortable thing to say with this crisis, but every crisis presents opportunities. The opportunity in this one is that the public and politicians and key stakeholders in the country have never understood the music industry. They've never understood how we make money. They've never understood. They think that we're a bunch of sort of happy party-going people who just rock up with an acoustic guitar, 54,000 people turn up, we all make loads of money, and then we go and spend it on drugs and whatever else we can find. The amount of people that are working on an Ed Sheeran gig has never occurred to them.
Because they only see one person on the stage.
They see one person on the stage, and that's
it. There is no understanding that.
No, and I think we should seize this opportunity while there's a lack of music. We don't need to do a massive. I mean, it'd be great to raise funds out of it, of course. But what we need to bring all these disparate campaigns together into one focused event, and we need to tell the story of what the music industry does. We need our biggest artists on it, but we need to get people who literally push the amps in, to get 2 minutes on a TV station somewhere saying, this is what I love doing, this is why I do it, this is what my life is like, this is what I get, because nobody knows anything about it.
No, that's been lacking, and we mentioned this in our first episode, because I feel like that's been lacking from this, is we've got pockets of stuff appearing in the media, but actually that unified voice, or the very, very large, voices from artists going, this is what this
like
is. This is how many people I employ. That's what no one's done. No one's, with some exception, but going, this is how many people I employ for one show, or this is how many people I employ for a tour. This is how many companies I work with that now have no work because I'm not touring. There's a real lack of that sort of, information, I think.
It's one of the industries in the world where if we're successful, everybody hates us. And if you try and explain the amount of failure that goes along behind before you get this, I mean, let's be honest, we don't know what people want next. If we did, we'd all be multimillionaires. We wouldn't be sat on this call. We'd all be in the Seychelles somewhere having a lovely time. Nobody knows what the public is going to decide. It's going to be, so to get what we've got with an Adele or an Ed Sheeran or a Dua Lipa, whatever it is that you like, you've got to have hundreds of thousands of performances and thousands and thousands of musicians supported by hundreds of thousands of people working on it, and eventually one of them rises up. But because of that, because it just looks it looks random almost rather than planned. This is all this stuff. I just feel like our whole industry is about selling dreams, and it's about selling like positivity and collective experience, and we've become just like stuck in our homes, moaning and whinging, and that's not how I feel at all. I feel like we need to go out there and say, this is one of the best in music jobs. This is one of the best jobs you can get. That's the truth. Being in the music industry is one of the best jobs you can get. It's brilliant, absolutely fantastic. And you know what? The British music industry is probably the best in the world. It's got some of the most fantastic people in it. It's got some of the most professional people in it. Let's not sit around in our homes. We should go on the BBC for 12 hours, relentlessly positive, recruiting every young person to go and tell their parents that they want to work in the music industry, because those people look like they really know what they're doing and they're having a fantastic bloody time to do it.
But it,
I thump the table now and say, "Give us the
true,
fucking
isn't
money!"
it?
Like Bob Geldof.
but it's true, like
I think that's why. I think it's just you know, I know why. Don't get me wrong. I know why. You know, I'm seeing all the mental health issues and everything, but we are about selling people like a dream of what, like, you know, and community and all that thing you said, Sammy, social, cultural, economic. We can demonstrate all that. We're just not putting that message out there at the moment. If I was a politician looking at us, I'd be thinking, well, they look like they've got the begging bowl out. You know, does it really matter? If they were on the TV saying, wow, this is thousands of jobs.
Yeah.
People got brilliant skills and incredible careers. And
Isn't that part of this issue? Even though you say, you know, with skills, it's really pissed me off that the government are talking like the people, you know, that work in our industry aren't skilled. I'm like, fucking hell, I've got a degree in sound production. Let me tell you that took a while.
It's also the viable thing, isn't it? This isn't a viable job. And you go, it bloody was before this happened. It's not like people are getting bored of going to see music and we should just all kind of give it up. It's like, it was viable before this happened. It'll be viable after it. And it like you say, that for all these reasons that people are great. I don't know. But
it's also, we've got some of the most educated and bright people. I mean, we've got a core team of 3 young women. I mean, I can't even count how many degrees they've got between the 3 of them, because these are young women that have done all these studies, these different things, and brought their skills, but they've got a passion for music. So they work for Music Venue Trust. And the idea that they might need to study something more viable is quite shocking. I mean, Clara, who's our venue support manager, she studied politics, philosophy and economics. It's not like she needs to upskill in any way. You know, nobody else in the country does her job. She's the expert on the job she does. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I put her on telly. That had shocked Oliver Dowden.
The other thing I think is the Ed Sheeran point. I think is something we trip up on over and over again. Like, again, in the streaming royalties debate, you see people saying, I don't see why Ed Sheeran needs more money. And you go, but it's not about that. It's about musicians who are not Ed Sheeran yet, but could be in the future. And like, even with this, I feel like maybe there was some more link in the campaign you ran about how understanding that Ed Sheeran is where he is now because he played those venues to 4 people.
Yeah, in all the venues that lost money when he played there.
I feel like maybe the positive thing is we are understanding that more. And I think, like you were saying, the artists get involved and they talk about the role that these venues have played for them. Like, there is, maybe we need to join those dots, and it's not just all these successful people on stage. You know,
No, I really would. Honestly, I'd use it as a huge, I mean, more than anything else, I'd just use it as a huge recruitment thing. If every young person in the country wanted a job in the music industry, I guarantee you politicians would be throwing money at us like you wouldn't believe. That's it. It's just really as simple as that. If you make it desirable and you make it all positive, people come along with that much easier than it.
They're not doing it right now. They're not being that helpful there, are they? I mean, they're openly suggesting that some people retrain. And I think when we talk back to, you know, the calls that probably James's organisation are getting, I mean, I know a couple of people that's rang on, well, what am I going to retrain as? I'm 20 years or I'm 30 years into this. Like, what is it exactly that I'm supposed to do? And I understand the idea of, you know, if someone needs to take a temporary job, but the big concern for me across our industry is that all these people leave and they don't come back. Yeah, and whether they're, you know, they go into something bloody miserable because the job that they love, that they get up and they enjoy doing every day, have they been told it's not there anymore? You know?
What was that, Cliff?
Like cyber or something.
Yeah, like cyber. I don't know, technically I work in cyber. I was trying to sort of figure it out.
The thing is, cyber is a calling for people, though. There are some people who cyber is their calling, and like, if you told them retrain as a ballet dancer, it would be just as ridiculous. Like, it just does seem strange, you know.
But the other thing that's really interesting about this whole concept of you should look somewhere else is, of course, as James will absolutely know, a huge number of musicians do lots of other things already. It's the story of you go to LA and every waiter is actually an actor. The big problem we've got is a huge number of creatives also work in hospitality, and those jobs are not there at the moment.
Or teaching.
Or they teach, and a lot of informal teaching has been reduced or stopped.
Third parties going into schools. I know a number of people that are dancers and musicians that are no longer allowed to go into schools or colleges to teach because of the risks. So all of it.
It's their whole portfolio of jobs that's actually been stopped. It's not just that they can't be working musicians, it's that all the things that they do to support that's their passion is also not allowed at the moment. And that's where the problem really lies with the creative industry, is that it's full of people who are very happy to do things that are not their major passion to enable that passion, but they can't currently do that either.
No.
But what job are they going to get? Because a lot of the sort of casual work jobs that would normally be available, they've dried up as well.
Well, according to the government's calculator, whatever it is, work predictor, I should be a boxer.
Me too.
And I think, Stuart, did you get boxer too?
I got boxer or cake decorator, which is kind of quite a wide. I'm not sure what the common line there is.
Well, I've been very amused. I've seen a number of friends on social media say they did it, and they're people in the music industry who've been told they should retrain as actors.
I've seen a lot of this. So, I mean, let's all agree that thing is bullshit, but also.
Well, no, wait a minute. I did it, and it said I should be prime minister, so I was completely.
I'd vote for you, Mark. I'd vote for you.
I'll thump the table a lot.
I think you'd have you'd be prime minister. Me, Cliff, and Stu will have a scrap.
Yeah.
That'll be episode 4 of a Zoom with a view.
Boxing is big on YouTube. I mean, I had a question. It might be a good final question, unless you have a final question. Sammy, I don't want to jump on you.
And then we must wrap up. So Stuart, you can.
So this picks off Mark's point about there is loads of money in parts of music industry and recordings, and we have these big companies like streaming services, the tech companies doing streaming, and the major labels. Like, what, from both your points of view, like, I know they have done stuff. They donated money. They've got behind campaigns. What could they do? What would you like? What more can they do? How can they work? How can they support in your respective work? How can they support what Proposition is doing? Because like there is
great question.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to phrase it as like criticize them for not doing stuff. Like, but how can they engage even more in what you're doing? What would you like to see?
I've got a strategic suggestion, which is there have been some generous donations. We have had some really nice support, and it's really heartwarming. And obviously, we always say thank you when people do give money to us. But what would be really, I think, really helpful more strategically would be some sort of program. We suggested one a couple of years ago, a pipeline investment fund, where there was a regular structure in which the more successful parts of the industry invested money back in the grassroots, not just the venues, but also the artists and the crew. And basically the less successful parts of the industry were subsidized in a way, a bit like they have in France. But in France, it's a government mechanism, and we're not super keen on including the government in this. We'd kind of like the UK industry to organize itself so that it wasn't subject to politics.
Just so you in France, there's a 3% tax on live.
Yeah, Mark, I've seen you talk about this, and it's always made a lot of sense to me that the more successful would be able to fund yeah.
But of course, the UK industry is so much more successful than the French industry. So imagine what the investment back in the research and development bit of the industry would be if there was a more formal mechanism for that, because most industries do invest profits back in R&D, but it doesn't really work in the UK because historically the R&D bit has happened organically. So everybody seems to think that will always be the case. And actually this year really shows you can't take stuff for granted, and we should be building systems to try and safeguard what we've got in the future. And the best way of doing that would be some sort of recognised inversion of investment of the funding.
I think it's a really good point, and I think that the starting point actually is just everybody in the music industry recognizing that everybody else is doing just as important job as they are.
Yes.
And I say that partly from personal experience when I worked at the Royal Albert Hall. We were incredibly passionate about the shows we put on, about the events that happened. But I think certainly my view was, the artists are really lucky to stand on our stage, and somehow there was a mentality that if it wasn't for the Royal Albert Hall, this thing wouldn't happen. And actually, that I don't say that to denigrate my colleagues there. They did do an amazing job to create an atmosphere,
and still do.
But it was, and still do. But it's them, and it's the crew, and it's the musicians, and it's the people who pay the royalties, and it's the agents, and it's the people in ticket offices, and it's everybody. And I think sometimes everybody in the music industry thinks that it would collapse if it wasn't for their bit. And actually, just this general acknowledgement that we are in an ecosystem, that every sector of the music industry not only needs each other, but is symbiotically linked to each other. And therefore, we want to see every section of the industry succeed all at the same time, and it will make everybody grow and do better. And all the boats will rise to water level. So I think it starts with that, just that acknowledgement that there's linkages, there's a pipeline, and if you, like you say, if you want the next Ed Sheeran, he's going to start on a stage in front of 10 friends in a pub, and he'll work his way up. And so we need to care about that stage, and we need to care about the guy who does the sound for that stage, and we need to care about every layer in between. And if we care, and if we think in those terms, think in terms of the ecosystem, people will then start to make decisions that are much more sharing and much more open, and a lot less defensive. So again, Mark, I'm agreeing with you. You can't have a government imposed thing, or you can't have a rule or a percentage. Because actually, there needs to be a change in attitude as much as a change in just flow of money.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for a Zoom review. You've been fantastic guests. After what we talked about last week, we literally couldn't have anything better. You talked about many boats rising and being grateful for what the government's done, etc. I want to be a little bit pompous here and speak on behalf of the whole industry. I cannot tell you how many meetings or Zooms I've been in where people have said how incredible the work at Music Venue Trust have been. Number of people, number of artists, number of stakeholders who said how really, Help Musicians really rose to the challenge. So, my goodness me, if there is anything left after all this madness, it will be in great part down to you guys. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's really appreciated.
It's really nice.
Great. Well, that's it for this week's Zoom with a View. Next week, as I teased earlier, we're hoping to be joined by the man of the hour, Tom Gray, who's been name-checked throughout this podcast, to talk about what the future of streaming looks like, how he's going to make sure that record keeps being broken, and actually how we can make sure that there's more money for everyone involved. So on that, say thank you very much. See you then.